hello, everybody. Happy marvelous Monday. Happy Monday. Happy Monday. I'm excited that you are joining me today. I am Karissa Spann. I am the landlord and tenant coach. This is what I do each and every Monday. So, if you had an opportunity to check out the description today, we are talking about 5 questions that landlords as well as tenants should ask before renting property. So, my session today, I'm live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I just want to say welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that something that I share will be of value where you like it, you tag somebody, and or you share it. Listen, if you are tuned in from any other page other than YouTube, please go to my YouTube channel and smash that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to know when I am live and online. I promise that my only goal today is to share information that is helpful, that's clear and understandable. All right. So this session is for landlords and it is for tenants. So if you would do me a favor, if this is your first time tuning in the comment or the chat box, let me know where you're tuned in from. I love to know where my viewers are watching from. So whether you're watching from Facebook, the LinkedIn, or the YouTube channel, go ahead and show me some love in the chat box. Say, hey, girl, hey, let me know that you are here. All right, so today I want to make sure that information I'm sharing is relevant. So if you have questions or if you have comments, drop it in the comment section for me. All right, so I have 5 questions that landlords should be asking tenants before they lease up their property. But I also believe that tenants should also ask landlords questions before they decide to sign a lease. Here's what I do know. Having been in the industry for well over 25 years as a landlord and tenant expert, I've been in the property management industry long enough to understand that sometimes there is a great disconnect between landlords and tenants. And here's what I've come to understand. I've come to understand that sometimes when people are not, they're not discussing expectations, they're not asking the right questions. Usually they end up in a situation that is not favorable for them as a tenant or the landlord. And so today, that's why I am delighted to share this information. So these are the top 5 questions. And certainly there are more questions that I believe landlords could and should ask as well as tenants. But for the sake of time today, I can only share the top 5 because I want to make sure that I'm giving information that's balanced across the aisle for both landlords as well as tenants. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm a property management professional. I'm a property management educator, and this is what I do each and every week right here at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So today, I'm going to go straight into it because I don't want to hold you long. But again, if you have questions, I do want you to drop it in the comment box. All right. As a matter of fact, before I get into the information that I've prepared to share today, I do want to ask a question for those of you who are landlords. So I recognize that landlords are watching. I recognize that I have tenants who are also watching. And I just want to give a shout out to my students who are tuned in. I love it when I see my students showing up because that means they are expecting me to share something new, something cutting edge. So thank you all for showing up today in whatever capacity you are watching in. So here's a question that I do have for you. So the description today is I'm sharing the top 5 questions. But if you are a landlord or if you are a tenant, what is a question that you believe is important to ask before signing a lease? All right, so let me just poll my audience. I want to know what you think a landlord should ask a tenant before they move in, or what should a tenant ask a landlord before they move in or before they sign a lease? So if you would just go ahead and put that in the comment section. I want to see what some of the responses are. Some of the answers I know are maybe along the lines of what I'm sharing today. But I want to poll you because I want to understand what you believe is important. Because here's the thing, I can share information, but landlords also need to know tenants need to know as well. And so take a moment and think about just one question. And even if you're not a landlord or a tenant, what is one question that you believe is important for a landlord to ask a tenant? Or what do you believe a tenant should ask a landlord before they sign a lease? All right, so I'm going to pause for a few seconds because I want to see rather, what your feedback is today. All right, so what do you believe a landlord should ask a tenant before they allow someone to move into their rental property? Okay, so let me just walk you through the scenario for those of you who may not be renters or landlords. When there's a rental property available, usually there's a process. There should be a criteria in place for owners to have where they are asking questions, they are showing their rental property, they're collecting applications, they're doing background checks and all of those things. But before all of those things takes place, before that takes place, what is something that a landlord should ask a tenant before they move in? And or answer this question. What is a question that you believe would be important for tenants to know or understand before they move into that rental property? All right, so I see a couple of inbox responses, and I am going to ask that instead of inboxing me your response, put it in the chats, put it in the chat box. Let's have the conversation today. All right, and then I'm going to read the two responses that did come in my inbox. So we are talking about information that is relative for a smooth landlord and tenant process. Hey, Miss Davis, happy marvelous Monday, beautiful, beautiful. You said a landlord should ask the tenant regarding their time of employment, how long they have been employed at their current job. That's a great question. Thank you so much for that, Miss Davis. That's a great question. All right, I'm going to wait for a couple of more to come in. So I'm asking you today, as a landlord or a tenant, what is a question or what are some questions that should be asked up front? Hey, Dee, thank you so much, cuz. Please make sure that you are sharing this information with somebody who is a landlord or a tenant. And again, this is what I do each and every Monday. And so usually when I'm live and I'm online, if you have questions, from a landlord perspective or a tenant perspective, this is what I'm here for, to answer your questions. And again, I love to know where my viewers are tuned in from, because the laws are going to be different just depending on the jurisdiction. So for instance, I have landlords who are tuned in from Chesapeake, Virginia. I have landlords who tune in from New York and North Carolina. Then I also have some, on the West Coast. So I always love to know where my viewers are tuning from. So I do appreciate you, cuz. Thank you for tuning in. All right, so I'm going to pause again. I'm asking, what question do you believe a landlord should ask a tenant before they sign the lease, before they move in? And then I also want to know, what do you think would be an important question? I mean, there's so many questions that could be asked, but just give me one. Put in the chat box one question that a tenant should ask a landlord before they move forward with the leasing process or the application process. And here's what I do understand. Renting property, think of rental property like this. Consider it like you would with a relationship or marriage. Usually, you don't just jump into bed, you don't just marry somebody you don't know. Now, I know that there are some exceptions to that rule, but usually and ordinarily, people who are looking for something lasting, something long term, they don't usually rush into something unless they're led by some other power or source. Right? So, when it comes to landlords and tenants and that landlord and tenant relationship, I want you to consider the longevity of it. You want to look at the long haul. Look at the goal as a landlord. What is your goal for this rental property? Are you looking for a short-term rental? Maybe a tenant for a 3, a 6, a 9-month lease? Or are you looking for someone that's going to get in and stay for a long period of time? So that's why I want to have this conversation today. All right, Ms. Davis, Tenants should ask, who do I contact if and when they need repairs? That is a phenomenal question. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Hey, Sam, happy Monday. I was waiting on you. Your question is, why are you moving from your current residence? That's a great question. Great questions. So you may see me repeat a couple of these. Now, today, I'm only sharing 5. There's a longer list of questions that should be asked, that could be asked. But the one thing that I do want to say is this: make sure that as a landlord, your line of questionings never violate fair housing laws. Okay, so you just want to make sure that you're not violating the law, because that could get you in a world of trouble. So you definitely don't want to ask questions that will violate prospects if it's based off of Miss Davis. There are fair housing laws. There are 7 protected class. Do you happen to know the federal housing laws, the 7 protected classes? All right. And I know that's kind of putting you on the spot, but there are 7 protected classes: race, color, religion, national origin. I'm forgetting the other 2, which escapes me. Um, but you should not be asking tenants. So, for instance, if you see a prospect who comes in and they say that they have a disability, you cannot, by law, ask them what the disability is. If you don't see, let's say, for instance, they say, okay, well, Ms. Davis, I am disabled. You don't see any physical evidence that they are disabled. You don't see a wheelchair. You don't see a cane, a walker, or anything of the such, right? Well, here's the thing when it comes to disability. And this is for a different segment. This is not necessarily for today, but I'm giving an example. You can ask a tenant or a prospect what their disability is, because a disability is defined as something that's physical as well as mental. So, although you can't see their disability, you cannot ask them what the disability is. So, that's what you cannot do. All right, but I do thank you for the questions that have come in today. So, let me bring up the first 5 that I have for landlords today. And then I'm going to share 5 for tenants as well. So here's the first question: why are you moving? That's a really great question to ask. And here is why. Landlords want to understand why this tenant wants to rent their place, to understand why they are moving. Um, do they have any issues with their current landlord? Are they being evicted? Right? You want to understand from them why they are moving. Why do they want to move to your rental property? Okay. So whether you are self-managing your property, whether you have a property management company and you work in a property management office, this is like leasing 101. This is leasing 101. All right. Understanding why a tenant is moving. Here's one of the things that I usually am listening for. I'll ask a prospect, hey, thank you so much for your interest in my rental property. By the way, why are you moving? Right. So I'm listening. I'm a skilled listener. I love listening. Sometimes I'm listening for what's not being said, but that's a different class. So if a prospect or an applicant is complaining about their current landlord, for instance, they may say something like, oh, well, my landlord is a slum landlord. My landlord never make repairs, and I've contacted the court. I've filed lawsuits against this landlord, and my previous landlord did the same thing. So that's a red flag for me, because there's something going on. Now, not to say that that's not a true story or a true statement, because I've been in property management long enough, almost 3 decades in this game, in the industry. And I recognize that sometimes landlords will not make repairs. But when I have a prospect and they are, or an applicant rather, and they're just going on complaining about their landlord, they're bashing, bad mouthing, I am usually asking myself, well, Karissa, and I know that I'm a great housing provider, right? So I'm not a slum landlord by any stretch of the imagination. That's just not what I do. Um, but I ask myself, well, Karissa, is this someone that you want in your property? True story. I had a young lady. She applied for one of the rental properties that we had available. And I had never met the young lady. My staff had been dealing with her. They had, they had a couple of open houses and a young lady. She provided the application, but we also require certain things with the application. And the young lady did not produce it, so they could not process her application. I think it must have been like a period of 3 weeks had gone by. They reached out to her by phone, they text her, they sent emails asking for the requirement because we have a criteria, we have a standard that must be met, right? And we don't deviate from it because I believe in treating a business like a business. And so this young lady, she finally submitted her information, but by the time she submitted the documents that we required, we had already accepted another application, someone who submitted all their documents at the point of them saying, okay, yes, we want to rent the property. So when this original young lady, when the first young lady, we follow up, well, my team follow up with her to say, we apologize, we selected another applicant. This young lady had the unmitigated gall to go on to say we were trying to steal her children's private personal information, and she was complaining that she was going to report us for fraud and blah 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 blah. Right, and so when I looked at the file. I looked at the file notes, and one of the questions that they asked her was, "Why are you moving?" She complained about her current landlord. She talked about how she was going to sue her current landlord for something similar to this. And so why am I sharing this information? Because it's important to understand that asking the right questions will give you usually an idea of the type of person you're going to have in the rental property. So that's why you want to ask, why are they moving? You want to know if they have any maybe circumstance that you should be aware of, right? So, for instance, the Violence Against Women's Act, VAWA, all right? For those of you who don't know, usually that's a situation where maybe a tenant was in some sort of domestic violent um, incident, right? Something happened and they abruptly have to move. Well, there's a law that protect people who are in domestic violent situations. And so you want to know those type of things. But again, you don't want to violate laws by asking certain types of questions. So I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Here's the second question I believe that landlords should know. The second biggest question: who will be living on the property? That's going to be so important for a couple of reasons. Number one, you want to make sure that you understand the occupancy standard for that particular property jurisdiction. So I'm going to use Washington, D.C., for example. All right. In Washington, D.C., and in many jurisdictions, there is a occupancy standard, meaning that there is two per bedroom and one in the regular, the main sleeping quarter, which is the living room. So let's say, for instance, Sam, you have a 3 bedroom property. According to DC occupancy standard, you want to ask the question, who will be living on the property, to make sure that that rental property is not over occupied. All right. So given the scenario, given the information that I just stated in Washington, D.C., is two people can sleep in 1 bedroom, right? And then one could sleep in the common area, the living room. So if you have a 3 bedroom, so that's 2, 4, 6, 7. The maximum amount of people in a 3 bedroom in Washington, D.C., according to occupancy standard, unless there's a housing program associated with a different guideline, the maximum amount of people for a 3 bedroom is 7 people. 2, 4, 6, 7 people. So let's say, for instance, Sam, you have a young lady, she wants to rent one of your rental properties that's a 3 bedroom. And you ask the young lady, hey, how many people will be living on the property? And if she says 8 or 9, doesn't matter if they are adults or children, that exceeds the occupancy standard. They will be over occupying that rental property. So that's one of the reasons why you want to ask who would be living on the property. Now you don't necessarily want to ask how many children will be living in a rental property, because that will violate the fair housing laws. So never ask about children, because here's why. You run the danger of violating a fair housing law if you ask that question about children and you deny them, because that potential person, that prospect could say that they were denied because of children. Family familial status is a protected class under fair housing laws. And although you mean well, sometimes what you don't know can or will hurt you. And so please never ask about children, but you can always ask who will be living on the property. All right, here's the third question. How long do you think you will stay? Here's why that question is so important. When you have a criteria, you have pretty much like, let's say like a timeline. Maybe you're looking for a long-term tenant, somebody that's going to stay in place for 3 to 5 years. When you ask this question, they say, oh, well, I'm only looking for a short-term rental, maybe about a year. I'm looking to relocate after a year. You may want to continue to go through the process of receiving more applications until you find someone that best fit your criteria of what you're looking for. So ask your prospects, how long do they think they will stay? Now, if it doesn't matter and you're okay with a short-term rental, then go for it. All right, here's another big question. I get a lot of people who ask me, well, Karissa, do I have to accept pets? Well, you can establish a criteria for your rental property. But here's one of the biggest questions that landlords should ask upfront. Do you have pets? That's important to understand. Here's the thing when it comes to pets, and I know that a lot of landlords are now starting to move towards allowing tenants to have pets. But then there's a large group who just flat out emphatically will state no pets are accepted in the rental community. So if you are a housing provider, if you are a landlord and you just don't want tenants to have pets in your rental property, this is a question you want to ask up front. Okay. Because if they say, oh, well, yes, I have a pet, don't waste your time collecting an application from someone that you know will not fit your criteria or will not qualify. It's just not worth wasting the time. Now, if you are a owner, your landlord, your property manager, investor, whatever capacity you're working in as a housing professional, let's say you decide to go from not allowing tenants to have pets to moving towards being a pet friendly community. When that happens, you can usually set a fee for the pet application fee, a pet deposit, and sometimes there's a pet monthly rent that is associated with that tenant having a pet and living in a property. But you don't know these things unless you have these conversations up front. Now, again, these are questions that you ask before going through the application process. They have not signed a lease, they have not moved in. You're just getting to know the person that expressed an interest. All right. And then the fifth top question here is this: when are you looking to move? Here's why this question is important. Okay, so I'm currently leasing up quite a few rental properties that are vacant, right? And so I'm looking for tenants that are ready to move in immediately. It would not be in my best interest to receive an application from people who are not looking to move until maybe 3, 6, or 9 months down the line. That's a waste of my time. That's the waste of their time because I'm looking for immediate occupancy. So find out when the person is looking to move in to make sure that you are getting what you want as a landlord. All right. So some of the questions were repeat from what we saw in the comment section. So I'm happy to see that we are on the same line of thinking. We had some other questions that came in, like, how long have you been employed? Those are important questions. So now let me just turn and focus my attention to tenants because I have a large population of viewers who rent property. Now, if you are a tenant or if you know someone who is a tenant, please know and understand that it's also important for you to get to know more about the person who's going to be your landlord. It is okay to ask questions. All right. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Just this past weekend, my team and I we conducted an open house. And what I really appreciated about some of the individuals who were there, they pulled us to the side, they asked questions, and they wanted to know. And that was so impressive. I love to have educated tenants renting my property because that says a lot. It speaks volumes. It does. All right, so let me go to my comments box here. All right. Miss Davis, you said, can a landlord deny the tenant with an emotional service animal? That's a great question. That answer is no. Let me answer the question first, and then I'm going to explain why. So if, for instance, Miss Davis, this tenant has some sort of disability, okay? You cannot deny a tenant. If they have a disability, you can't deny them that. If their healthcare provider has given them the prescription really to have it, because obviously it is in place to help them to improve or to cope with their condition, or to have sometimes what's considered a normal life, a normal way of living. And so sometimes an emotional support animal or service animal is in place to help tenants cope and to manage. And so you can't deny a tenant, especially if they're disabled, who say they have an emotional support or service animal. Now, an emotional support animal and a service animal, I know sometimes we put it together, but those are two different types of animals. A service animal is usually trained. So, for instance, it may be a dog who is trained. If someone is having a seizure or something like that, the dog is trained to do certain things and maybe nudge the person or whatever. An emotional support animal is not trained, and it's really, unfortunately, and I'm smiling because I had this conversation with my class. There's not really a list of, there's no definitive list of emotional animals, emotional support animals. So that could be a guinea pig, it could be a bird, it could be a snake. Um, the list could go on and on and on, right? It could be a small pig, right? So when it comes to emotional support and a service animal, totally two different classes, but very similar. Great question. Thank you for that. All right, Sam, I'm coming to you. What is a reasonable pet deposit? Well, Sam, it just depends on the property. If you have a luxury high-end property, usually those fees are a lot higher. You could have a pet deposit in the range of 250 or 500, 750. It really just depends, Sam, but that's a great question. So you have a pet deposit, right? So the pet deposit, it would act pretty much like a security deposit. So when a tenant moves, as long as there's no damage from the pet, they are entitled to receive the pet deposit. Okay. Now, if, for instance, there is damage to the property when that tenant moves out, you just want to make sure that you have enough in the account to cover the damage. So think about worst case scenario, Sam. If you allow your tenants to have dogs, right? Let's say the dog scratches up the carpet, or scratches up and damages the hardwood floors. How much money will it cost you um, to repair or to replace those items? And so just consider that, and maybe just look up also pet deposits for the type and the size of rental property that you have. So you can have a condo, you can have an apartment, you can have a townhouse or a single family house. And the fees may range. The fees may be a little bit different depending on the type of property, the bedroom size, the square footage, and all of that stuff. But that's a great question, Sam. All right, so now let me go to my tips, my questions for tenants. These are questions that tenants can and should ask landlords. All right, here's the first question. And this is for my tenants who are viewing, my tenants who are going to watch the replay, because some of you are going to share, because sharing is caring. You're going to share this with somebody else to make sure that they are getting this information. All right, the first question that a tenant should ask a potential landlord: how do I pay the rent? That's important to know because in the day and age of which we live, we are now accustomed, many of us are used to technology. And sometimes landlords, if they are anything like me, if they have watched my weekly live, if they have come through my coaching program, they know to allow tenants to have multiple ways to pay the rent. Here's the thing, we as a housing provider, as a landlord, we want to make it convenient for tenants to pay the rent on time. So it is perfectly okay as a potential or prospective tenant to ask your soon to be landlord how you pay the rent. Here is why that's important. Let's say, for instance, you have a landlord who will allow you to pay through, let's say, PayPal or Venmo or Cash App. Sometimes when you are paying your rent through an electronic platform, there may be a service fee, and you need to know that. So let's say the tenant's rent is $1,000 a month, and a landlord is using Cash App on the business side. Well, a Cash App on the business side could be a service fee of 2.75%. Okay. And so usually, if there is a service fee associated, the landlord would pass that fee to the tenant. So the tenant will have to pay that $1,000 for the rent plus whatever the service fee is. So you just want to ask the question so that you'll know, okay, well, if I'm going to pay my rent by Cash App or Venmo, if I'm paying it by way of Zelle, understand what fees are associated with it so you'll know what to add to the rent. Okay, so that's the first question. Here's another question that tenants should be asking, all right, landlords, before you sign your lease. You want to understand what happens if the rent is paid late. Usually there is a late fee involved, and the late fee, it could be a flat fee or it could be a percentage of what the contract rent is. So for instance, in most of my rental properties in one particular jurisdiction, the late fee is 5% of the contract rent. Okay. So if the rent is $2,000 a month, if the tenant pays the rent late, they are responsible for the rent plus 5% of that contract rent. So you want to ask this question up front. So let's say the rent is due on the 1st. You want to understand, when does the late fee kick in? So if you have up until the 5th of the month to pay your rent, and if you pay it on the 6th, then you should consider that, yeah, you're paying your rent, but you should also be adding on that late fee, because if it's in the lease, when you sign your lease, the landlord will hold you responsible for the lease that you have signed. Okay. And in many places, in many jurisdictions, tenants can be evicted if they habitually pay their rent late. So if a tenant is paying their rent late each month over and over and over and over, that is a violation of the lease. And you could be terminated if you are violating your lease. So ask this question up front so that you'll know what you can expect. So you'll know when to pay your rent. And if you pay it late, the landlord don't have to tell you that you owe a late fee, because you already know. All right. Here's a third question, and then I'm coming to the chat box because I see comments are coming in. What utilities will I have to pay for? I suggest that tenants ask this question up front so that you'll know how to budget your money. So if you know you have to pay electric, if you have to pay gas, if you have to pay water, then you want to maybe do some research to see, on average, how much will it cost on the electric bill or the gas bill or the water bill every month or every 3 months or whenever the bill comes, so that you'll know how to budget your money. So let's say, for instance, on a 2-bedroom apartment, right? It has gas, a gas stove, uh, central air, which is electric, and the tenant is responsible for gas and electric, and the owner pays the water. So in that particular property, let's say the utilities can come up to about $250 a month, and they have a budget of, let's say, they don't want to go more than $1,750. Okay, so $1,750 is the max. That's the rent plus the utilities. Okay, so if $1,750 is the max, they should not be looking to pay more than $1,500 for rent. So if $1,750 is your max, don't find an apartment for $1,750, knowing that electric and gas still have to be paid. That is going to exceed your budget. It's going to exceed your max, unless as a tenant you have the flexibility to make up the difference. And so this is an important question to ask. And that definitely is in line. Okay. Here's another question. Tenants should be asking a landlord if they are required to pay or required to have renter's insurance. Here's why. Usually, owner's insurance, our insurance doesn't cover tenants' personal belongings. If there's theft, if there's damage, our insurance does not cover that. All right. And so on average, an insurance policy can cost maybe $12 a month. Sometimes less, sometimes more. It just depends on where the property is and the property type. So you want to definitely ask this question up front, because if you are renting from someone who requires you to have renter's insurance, and you know you may not be able to either afford it or you just flat out don't want to have it, ask that question up front so that you can make sure that all the expectations are met. All right. Here's a fifth question. This is for tenants. Are there any specific instructions or requirements? So for instance, when it comes to maintenance requests, this is one of the questions we saw in the chat box earlier. Uh, Tenants want to know if there's an after-hour emergency regarding maintenance repairs, right? How can the tenant contact either the management office? Is there an emergency repair, emergency maintenance number? Is it a 24-hour number that they can call? They want to find out, can they contact the property manager after hours? They also want to find out, maybe, for instance, if there is a guest policy. This is important also for landlords to know and understand. So please hear me clearly when I share this. All right. Sometimes tenants don't understand that a guest policy may consist of someone coming to the property, them staying, but not more than 3, 4, or 5 days. As a landlord, you cannot enforce rather something that you've never implemented. So if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So just because I'm sharing it, okay, if it's not in your lease currently, landlords, you cannot implement something that is not currently in existence. So you can't enforce something that doesn't exist. But if there's a guest policy in place and a tenant agrees to saying, okay, well, they understand that the guest policy for where they live consists of a person, whoever it is, staying not more than 3, 4, or 5 days, then that is the criteria. So I know that sometimes landlords have an issue when they go to the property and they see extra people living there. That would be a violation of your lease. If you are a tenant and you have people who are staying there who are not on the lease, they've exceeded the time frame of which you agreed to in your lease, your landlord can actually take you to court because you are violating your lease. And I know that a lot of tenants are not really liking me right now because I'm sharing this information. But if you sign a lease without asking these questions, you are signing saying that you agree with all of the terms, whether you read it, whether you understood it or not. And so this is why I'm sharing this information. Okay. I believe in treating business like a business. All right. So let me go to the chat box because I see more questions are coming in. Ms. Cobb, does a landlord have the right to enforce their lease until the end date in court if the tenant is requesting an emergency transfer due to Vawa? That's a great question. Enforce your lease until the very end, because although you could have a tenant in place, they may be going through this Vawa scenario, right? But let's say they decide that they don't want to leave. They just decide to stay. Maybe they decide to work it out with their boyfriend, their boo thing, their girlfriend, or whatever, whoever, their spouse, right? And they decide to stay because maybe they really like the school. Maybe it's really close to shopping, dining, entertainment, public transportation, and they really want to stay in that community. Listen, if they decide to stay, then you have to start all over again with taking them to court. So, to answer your question, continue to go through with the process until you can't go any further, unless you just decide you don't want to. But that's a great question. So, I would definitely recommend, if you're taking a tenant to court, even if they have a VAWA case, still take them to court. Hey, Sandy, thank you so much for tuning in. You said if a renter damages your property and surrounding units has no renter's insurance, can you evict them or hold them financially responsible? That's a great question. You absolutely can. It should be in your writing. I mean, in writing, in your lease, rather, that they are responsible for damage. Whether it's them, their guests, people that are visiting, they're responsible for damage. So it should definitely be in writing. But yes, you can hold them financially responsible. You do have to take them to court, and please make sure that if you are taking them to court, that you have all of your documentation, because documentation be conversation any day. So that's pictures, that's videos, any invoices or bills. When you go to court, you want to have all of your ducks lined up to make sure that you get a slam dunk, because it's nothing worse than going to court. And although you may have a strong case, without the evidence, the judge can rule in favor of the tenant. So you don't want to do that. And I've seen so many situations in court where landlords took tenants to court, and rightfully so, the tenant was responsible. But because the owners did not have their documentation, the tenant countersued and ended up suing the landlord, which was absolutely crazy to me. But like I said, documentation beats conversation any day. Great question. You're welcome. It's my pleasure. So those are my 5 questions that I gave today for landlords as well as for tenants. So I just want to do a recap really quick. For those of you who are tuning in who may have came in a little bit late, let me just review some of the questions that I shared for landlords. These are questions that you could and should be asking prospects before they sign on a dotted line, before you accept them as a tenant in your rental property. These are just some of the questions here that you want to ask. Why are you moving? Who will be living on the property with you? How long are you planning to stay? Do you have pets? And when are you looking to move? You want to ask questions to understand who the person is, to make sure that you're able to cater to them. And you want to make sure that they fit the criteria and the mode of what you're looking for in terms of having the best tenant in your rental property. And so this is a recap, the 5 questions that I shared with tenants. These are some questions that you can be asking, you should be asking your potential landlord when you have rental property. How do I pay the rent? What happens if the rent is late? What utilities will I have to pay? Do you require renter's insurance? And are there any specific requirements associated with me living on or at the property? All right. So that's what I wanted to share today. I could have shared a whole lot more, but for the sake of time, I was mindful, and I wanted to be respectful of your time today. So I just want to say thank you for tuning in. My time is up. I thank you for yours. Please make sure that you are tuning in each and every Monday right here on either this Facebook page, YouTube, or LinkedIn, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If any information that I've shared today was helpful, please share it with other landlords. Please share it with tenants. Give me your feedback. Let me know if you find this helpful. Also, if you have subject matters that you would like for me to cover in the upcoming weeks, please either inbox me or email me. Let me share my email address. Give me one moment as I pull it up, because I want to make sure that you can reach me if you have to. All right. So this is my email address here. You can email me, karissaspann@gmail.com. karissaspann@gmail.com. And by way of announcement, I just want to just remind those of you who have already signed up for my 6-week Landlord Master Strategy course that you will receive an email from me. I am delighted, I'm excited and passionate about what I do. I also just want to share that my 6-week course, many of you know that I teach property management, college level property management, and I also have created a course where you work with me one-on-one or in a group setting for 6 consecutive weeks, where I work with landlords to help you put systems in place. When I do these weekly lives on Monday, I'm telling you what to do. But when you get into the coaching with me, I'm showing you how to do it. I will assess what you have in place and help you to put something greater and stronger in place. So if you thought that this was good today, I promise you that a 6-week course will do you will be in your best interest. So again, my time is up. I thank you for yours, and share this information. Continue to show up. Continue to get this free information. This is free 99. I was speaking with the landlord right before I came on, and they had a lot of questions about tenants and renters and the types of programs that are available. Listen, there is so much going on. And here's what I do know: spring has sprung, right? A lot of people will be moving. A lot of renters are looking for a new place to call home. So please, by all means, share the information that you received today and use some of the questions that I shared today. Even tenants, use some of the questions that I shared today. Go back and watch the replay. Jot those questions down so that when you get into a circumstance or a situation where you may need to ask questions, you know the right questions to ask. All right. So I'm going to log out for now, and I hope that you will continue to tune in, and I will see you all next week. Hey, Lynn, thank you so much for tuning in today, beautiful.